Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Step Up to the Mic. This is the place for aspiring and established speakers to take the stage, deliver their talks, and bring them directly to you. Our featured speaker today, he is a renowned international speaker. He's a motivational speaker. He's the founder of the SeeLink. Please welcome to the stage, Caleb Matthews.
I was bored. I was on the top of my game. I had done everything that was asked of me to do. I'd won the awards, been on the trips, had all the exclusive prizes come across my table. I was successful. I was one of the top performers in sales for my position, but I was bored. I was not walking in the full DNA of my design. Hello, everyone. We are going to dive into what walking in the DNA of design looks like. And for me, I spent 10 years in the corporate world expressing a gift that I was very good at. I was good at sales, won the trips, went on the retreats, reached the pinnacles for those goals. But there was still something gnawing at me on the inside that wasn't fully embracing my DNA of design. And you'll be asking yourself this question as you are listening to me in this moment. Caleb, what is our DNA of design? Very simply put, our DNA of design is that internal clock, that mechanism that propels us from the unseen to the seen in our giftings, in our abilities, in our way of being able to reach people and feel fulfilled in our unique purpose. But in Big Corp, for 10 years, though I was successful on the outside, and people thought I was in a plum job because I was in a plum job, plum career, sitting comfortable. For me, it wasn't enough because I was serving another man's vision, another man's perspective. And I wasn't following in my own structure, the way that God designed me for. I was designed for more than just sales. In fact, I was raised in an entrepreneurial family where pivoting and reinventing ourselves on the fly and being willing to step into the unknown is just a normal thing. And when I reached Big Corp, I had to put a lot of my passions like motivating, inspiring, and speaking on the shelf. At the age of 18 years old, I had my first audience, and besides my family and besides my stuffed animals or the dogs in the front yard that I would read stories to as a child. I had a captive audience that was in an international country, in Kenya, in Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, these countries in East Africa, where I would go into these impoverished places and speak to orphans, to students in the Bible colleges and churches and these places about how God sees them and is encouraging them to walk in the DNA of design. And I had to put that on the shelf when I stepped into the court. And that gnawed at me, really. And I was forced to ask myself this question after I reached the 10-year mark. Caleb, can you see yourself for another 10 years serving the empire, being a hamster on the wheel, being another piece in the machine? And when I came to the answer, no, then I had to pivot. I had to start looking for other opportunities and other places to be able to express that. And so I said to myself, I said to God as well too, I'm going to put out a fleece. I'm going to put out a test to see if this environment is cohesive with my DNA of design as an exhorter. I'm going to see if this is going to be a place where I can build my career to the next level. And so it was that I did a proposal to the president of the company, to the owner of the company. I can still remember it now, 3 years ago now. It seems like a lifetime ago. And I had a proposal that I had vetted by many people that were above him of an idea where I could be mobile and agile and work 6 months here and 6 months there in Mexico and also back in Canada, where I'm from, for the telecom company, and be a mobile unit and carve out my own position within the company. I felt like I'd reached that place where I'd earned that right. And so it was that I came to the proposal that I craftily prepared over several months and even up to a year. And that phone call conversation that I had with the boss of the company, I could still remember it being in the waiting area of Houston International Airport in Texas. And then the call came from my boss that he finally returned the call from the email that I'd given him of that proposal. And I was willing to bet on myself that I would even be willing to less for pay, less income, less of a paycheck if this test was willing to be tested out for a few months, several months. And if it didn't work, I would go back to the position I was in the retail sales environment. And my boss, he took a deep breath and he sighed and he said, Caleb, I'm not willing to do that. I am not willing to test this out with you. And I realized in that moment that after 10 years of being a loyal servant to the empire of Big Corp, that I was no different than anybody else. Like the clone troopers in Star Wars, I was no different than a clone trooper marching in line with no unique DNA design. And the next thing that my former boss told me, said to me, and declared was a culture shock for me, as it would be for you listening to this. And this is what he said: Caleb, online sales do not work. And I couldn't believe it. I could not believe this outdated perspective in this mindset, because the generation that we are part of right now is Generation Resign. We are in a generation where we are pivoting and there's constant movement of technology and innovation and resources. And unfortunately, my former boss was from the older order, which believed that you got to show up to your 9 to 5 job, clock in, clock out, and do everything the same as everybody else. But he was not willing to let me express my DNA of design, my God-given abilities as an exhorter, as one to carve out my own path. And instead, he said that wouldn't be fair to everybody else. And so it was that I was not given the respect that I had earned, and I was thrown in with everybody else. And I knew in that moment it was time to move on. So I did. I left the comfortable house, the career of 10 years, beautiful city, and a plum career job that many people would say, Caleb, how crazy can you be to leave this comfortable position? But when it comes to walking in our DNA of design, staying in the realm of comfort is not an option. The cult of comfort is a real thing. How can one learn from a story like this? As you're listening there, you're thinking, all right, Caleb, that's good for you. You made the pivot. You moved from your 10-year career job and you carved out your path as a nomad, digital nomad, and entrepreneur, opening up 2 businesses in Mexico and living internationally by your own terms. That's good for you. But what about for me? How does this work for me? Well, comes down to this one boiling factor, and that is conscience. To go against conscience, as Martin Luther said, is neither right nor safe. And that was part of my final email and signing off with the company that I'd been for 10 years, quoting Martin Luther: to go against conscience is neither right nor safe. And for ourselves, we must follow the leading of our conscience, of our trichotomous being, because there is a difference between your trichotomous being and your dichotomous being within the DNA of your design. What does this even mean? Well, the trichotomous being is we have a spirit that has a soul, that has a body. And most of the world in the hustle culture, especially the 9 to 5, or the busyness of this world that we live in, is on the hamster wheel of the dichotomous being and is not acknowledging the trichotomous being. The dichotomous being only operates off of the mind and the body, but without that connection to the spirit, that inner conscience. And for you, I say this: take a census of your senses. Step back and ask yourself this question: is the environment that I'm in, is the situation and the season that I'm in, a physical setting, or it could just be a posture of the heart, is the core value of what I'm standing on cohesive with my DNA of design, or does it go against my conscience? If it goes against your conscience, I would propose to you that you are not walking in the fullness of the DNA of your design. And therefore, it is crucial to take a step back and take a census of your senses, as I did those few years ago, which seemed like a lifetime ago, and be willing to step out in courage. Because on the other side of courage is opportunity. Without obstacles, there is no opportunity, because our obstacle will become our arsenal. Look back across history, because history does speak. We can look back across history. What do we see? We see entrepreneurs, we see leaders, people like Thomas Edison, people like Marco Polo, people like Joan of Arc, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar. Can go on and on about the many different heroes of antiquity and of those across the timeline of human history. And what do these entrepreneurs and these leaders and these motivators have in common? They were successful and left an imprint of the DNA of their God-given design on humanity because they stepped beyond what was comfortable. They pushed the boundaries. Within our DNA of design, it will require you and I and us, if we want to walk in our trichotomous being, spirit, soul, and body, in order to embrace that full measure of who we are, it requires pushing back against con culture. Because con culture will always compete against the DNA of our design to transform us into its image versus the image of our God-given DNA of design. Let me give you an example. You may be thinking, Caleb, where do I even start? I just don't know where to start. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Some of you have doubts, some of you are in alignment and you're following me. But for those of you who may be having some deer in the headlights questions, I want to assure you of a practice that you can do to get back into alignment with the DNA of your design. And that is what I call the I of I principle, the early years of entrepreneurship, of innovation. And within the DNA of our design, we can look back into our early years that formed us for clues to follow along this path to lead us to where we are today as developed adults. And that is, here's an example from my childhood. When I was 7 or 8 years old, one of the first captive audiences I had was not people in Africa or in the Philippines or in any of the places that I've spoken to over the last 20 years. It was on the front lawn of my family home in Langley, British Columbia, Canada. It seems like yesterday, but a lifetime ago. And that was reading a book, a children's book, to our friendly neighborhood dog, Black Labrador called Ace. I still have the photo on my memories of my childhood and can look back on those moments and think, wow, those were just wonderful things to be able to experience with the dog. And I would read a children's book and I would speak to the dog as if he was a human being and read him stories and motivate him and say, okay, this is what the story says, and this is how we can go here to here, from this place to that place, and learn those SeeLinks within the actual design of that story, the DNA of design, you could say. And those early years prepared me for who I am right now. And for you, those early years also have prepared you for where you are right now. And it starts with the willingness to step outside of the normal dichotomous wheel of the world's normal structure. Because if we follow what the normal path for success is in the world that we are part of, we'll fall short. If we try putting on somebody else's armor, if we try to become like the next Grant Cardone or Kim Kardashian, Taylor Swift, Cristiano Ronaldo, Tom Brady, Serena Williams, just to name a few athletes and those who are motivators and those in the financial industries and so forth, etc., and Hollywood. If we try to become like somebody else and put on their armor, then we're not going to fall along in alignment with the DNA of our design. Oftentimes, you may have heard the expression, don't wear somebody else's armor. That comes from an ancient biblical story. And this is the final story that I will conclude with as we land the ship. And that is David versus Goliath, one of the famous stories of the Bible, of history, of antiquity. David, a underdog, the shepherd boy that would face off against a seasoned warrior called Goliath, who had only known war. And David had only known looking after his father's sheep and fighting off the lion and the bear. And when David came to bring food to his brothers in the battlefield, as the account says in the Bible, he heard the Philistine Goliath challenging the armies of the living God, saying, who's going to fight me? Who bring out your champion? And for 40 days and 40 nights, the people of Israel buckled underneath the taunts of an angry and a mocking giant. But when David came to Saul, the king, and said, I'm going to fight this giant, the Khan culture started already. The mockery, the you can't fight him, you can't do this. But David said, I can do it. For surely I have these testimonies because when I walked in my DNA of design and fought off the lion and the bear with my staff and my sling, I was successful. God gave me success. And therefore, the Philistine will be no different. Finally, Saul relented and said, all right, you can be my champion. Go ahead. But there is one more requirement, and here's the part of the story, the famous tale of David and Goliath, that most people do not see. And that is when Saul said, you have to wear my armor. Put on my armor. And only then, when you put on my armor or my DNA of design, so to speak, what's worked for me will work for you. And David tried on the armor, but he said, I can't do this. I can't wear this. I'm not used to this. And they said, how can you face a giant without the king's armor? The king did it his way. Oh, surely it has to be done his way, conform to his way. No, my faith is enough, and what is put in my hand, my staff, stones, and my faith. And we know the rest is history. He faced off against Goliath, and the mighty giant fell because a young shepherd boy, the unlikeliest hero, walked in the DNA of his design. And for you and I, maybe we're not a shepherd boy on a battlefield facing off against a giant or in the corporate world for 10 years. Maybe you weren't like I was, stepping out from that environment and going into a different path for the DNA of your design. Your story could look very different. In fact, much of your story looks much different than mine. I hope it would be, because that's what makes us unique. Your story is unique within your DNA of design. And to bring this home, ask yourself, your conscience, your higher power, God, this question. Am I walking in my DNA of design? Am I going against my conscience or for my conscience? And finally, am I operating on a dichotomous worldview or a trichotomous worldview like I was created for? If you answer yes to the trichotomous worldview, you answer yes to, am I walking in the DNA of design? You answer yes that you are following your conscience. You are in a good place. You are on a good path. If maybe some of your answers are no and you're struggling, then maybe it's time to step back and take a census of your senses and walk in the DNA of your design. Thank you very much.
Caleb Matthews, everybody. Caleb, that was absolutely amazing. I loved everything that you had to say right there. And if you don't mind, I have just a couple of questions for you
Yes, yes,
about,
sir. Go
about
for it.
that amazing talk. The DNA of design. I'm fascinated by the concept, and I just from the context, I have a very good idea, I think, of what you're referring to here. Question I have is that if people are listening to this and they're going, okay, I have to figure out what my DNA, of design is. Is this something that is inherent in them that they're trying to identify? Is this something that is constantly changing? Can you maybe describe what it is we're looking for inside of ourselves when we're trying to find out what is our own DNA of design?
I would say yes to both. It is both, and it's a paradox. It's one, it's both, it's the other. It is both. And what I mean by that is I believe that God has put an imprint on each one of us of something we've been created with uniquely. That's unique to you, unique to me, unique to our audience. So there is something within us that's our DNA of design, but also how the seasons change and how that DNA of design is expressed can definitely look different, like the seasons, the four seasons that we have in the world, the fall, winter, spring, summer, and pivoting and shifting and knowing when to shift. And the seasons will look different, but the internal core of that treasure, that gem that's within each one of us, our DNA design, will come out as those seasons change and be willing, like a sailboat with the sails up to the wind, to be taken from one place to the other.
Nice. I appreciate that. The
Yeah.
another thing on your trichotomy and dichotomy,
Yep.
as you were talking about in terms of having to separate those two, the SSB method that you described, the spirit, the soul, the body. Do I have that
Yep.
right? Okay.
You do.
Right. Great. The spirit is what's missing in between the
Yep.
two. And so how do people go about finding that piece? I mean, is that different for everybody? Is it, spiritual faith in terms of the Bible and God? Is it spiritual in terms of the universe and, energy and that sort of thing? What's your take on that? Because it can be taken by a lot of different people in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and everybody has their own interpretation for that, and that's something I constantly want to be aware and careful with, and especially in the many different audiences I've been with, and from New Age cultures to Bible college cultures to among Wiccans and psychics to polytheists to Hindus to Muslims to atheists. Like I've been around quite a lot of different people in the travels and the years. I've been as a speaker and a motivator, especially in dream interpretation as well too. That's a whole different topic as well. But this whole thing of the source. My desire is when somebody steps away and they hear the word spirit within spirit, soul, and body, that they would be encouraged that they wouldn't just continue on the same path of everything that can be done with my willpower, my mind, will, and emotions or body, but there is a unseen influence, and whatever person's language is for that influence, that's up to them. For me, I believe in the God of the Bible. That's my belief system, but I will always speak in parabolic language to make people really discover for themselves what that looks like for them. So the goal is that people would pull on influence that would direct their life and not just feel like everything's in their own control, because that's not the way life works in my perspective.
Sure, sure, absolutely. You talk
Yeah.
about con culture, and to me that also sounded like it could be synonymous with spiritual warfare of some type of thing. When we encounter that, what's your advice for people who when you run into that, what do you do with it? Do you fight back against it? Do you try and convince somebody else of what it is? Do you ignore it, turn the other cheek? If what you're trying to do is come into real terms with your own DNA of design. What's the best way to handle the con culture that comes at you?
Best way to handle con culture is to resist following the beat, the drum beat, and the clone culture of everybody else. So it could be that 99 people say that this is the direction I believe you need to go in, and they try to force their opinion. Well, if you have a conviction, and I have a conviction in our conscience that no, actually, that's not my armor I'm supposed to wear, that's not cohesive with my DNA of design, then I'll encourage the person to go in the opposite. And so resisting con culture means no matter what numbers are for you or against you, whatever metrics are there, to push that aside and see what is in alignment with your conscience and with just following your gut, but also following spirit, following God, and be courageous to follow that, even if the majority are against you, because God operates off of a different metric than the earthly metric. And I think that when we start to take a census of our senses properly and not fall into the earthly census of what their definition of success is, then we're in a good place. If we feel like, oh, I have to constantly perform or prove myself, then as soon as performance comes into play, then we know we've hit con culture. So opposite of con culture is what it says in the book of Romans, be renewed by the transforming of your mind. And that starts with speaking to our subconscious and declaring to ourselves that we are going to rewire our neurological pathways by faith, because it takes faith to do that in a world that's screaming for the opposite direction. Sometimes you got to buckle up, put your feet in the sand, and say, "This is my line, and I'm not crossing it."
I love that. Now, as you do this, as you travel, as you give talks like this one, who is it you're speaking to, and what is the purpose in doing the talk? What is it you hope to accomplish by doing a talk like you just did, for whoever it is it's for?
My purpose and my goal would be that every culture, background, and individual that has a DNA of design, which I think pretty much covers every person on the earth, would take something away from this and say, okay, I need to step back and do an inventory on my life to see, am I really walking in why I've been put here, or am I not? And simply put, to encourage every listener that is hungry and willing and eager and anticipating and curious to lean in, to encourage them to follow that path of their DNA of design. So the message is for any ear, any listener that will listen, and those who do, to have the courage to do it, even if it costs them equity, even if it costs them social equity, if it costs them cultural equity, it costs them family equity, no matter what the cost is, to embrace it, because to go against conscience is neither right nor safe.
That's such a great quote. I love that one. Okay, I have one more question for you, but before I hit you with that, give everybody your contact information. How can they reach Caleb Matthews? How can they find out more about what you're doing? Get your help. Contact you.
Sure. www.calebmatthews.net. That is my main website for the SeeLink. And if you're somebody listening that says, okay, I want to discover what my unique purpose is, maybe you don't know what it is, maybe you do, and you just need a little bit of a refresher and some constant encouragement, this is the place to be. This is the hub to be, to find those sea links in the day and in the night season. Whole different topic, as I said, but to follow those sea links and to help you reach your DNA of your God-given design. CalebMatthews.net, that's the main page, and would love to have you along the journey as you are in the hub with me.
Beautiful. Last question, because I just, as soon as I heard it, I was off camera, but I started sort of smiling to myself. I don't know how you handled it, but do you have anything after everything you've built and as far as you've come since that moment? Do you have anything that you want to maybe say to the person who so wisely said to you, online sales don't work?
They do, because because there is no limitation when we are walking in our DNA design of our influence and what we can reach. One of my old mentors, who's passed on several years ago, he often said this, that he would always want to trade his favor for influence. And influence is the way into the hearts and minds of this generation. And however you do that, influence is always a better trade than favor. Favor is seasonal. Favor can come and go like the wind. But influence comes by a lifelong pursuit and a willingness to be crushed. Because you and I both know, Rory, that a lot of people love to just talk about the victories, the peachy moments, the wins. And there's nothing wrong with celebrating wins, but the reality is that we all go through crushing, and the depth of your valley is proportionate to the height of your mountain. And the deeper the valley, the higher the mountain. Trade your favor for influence.
Love that. Absolutely great way to wrap us up. Thank you for that. Um, Renowned international motivational speaker, founder of the SeeLink, Caleb Matthews. Look him up on calebmatthews.net. Caleb, I cannot thank you enough for being here today and for delivering your message the way that you did. It was very powerful and a whole lot for everybody to think about. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Rory. Honor to be with you and your audience.
Thank you. Folks, this has been another just absolutely spectacular episode of Step Up to the Mic. And if you're an aspiring or current speaker and you want to bring your talk to the masses, message us today. Never stop talking and let us help you to step up to the mic.